Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the Royal Society. I'm just going to do a few housekeeping pieces. First of all, can I ask you all to make sure that your mobiles are switched onto silent? And also, I want to let you know we're not planning any evacuations this evening, so if you do hear something, it's real. And your exits are the room where, the door where you came in there and one up here by the stage. And the other thing to let you know is that we are filming this evening's event, webcasting it for the Society's archives. So just to let you know that. And now we can begin. So I'd like to introduce Sir Paul Nurse.
Are you all excited? Yes. This is going to be an exciting evening, I can tell you. I'm really looking forward to it. One of my favourites of the year, because we're going to hear some great readings and we're going to have a bit of an Oscar moment towards the end. So I'm excited and I hope you are too. Now, what's going on tonight is an event to celebrate, of course, the shortlist of the 2015 Royal Society Winton Prize for Science Books. We like to think of it as the premier science prize award in the world. Tonight we will be listening to readings from the shortlisted authors and, importantly, of course, finding out who the winner is. The winner is in here. I do not know who the winner is. I hope the jury knows who the winner is, but it's in here and we'll find out about it, who that is, partway through the evening. Now, this prize, the Winton Prize for Science Books, celebrates the very best in popular science writing. And ever since that prize was established, it was established by the Society in 1988, it has had the same aim. It is to encourage the writing, publishing, and reading of good and accessible popular science books. It has grown, as I've said, to become one of the world's leading book prizes on science, one of the UK's most prestigious non-fiction literary prizes. And it's currently supported by Winton. We're going to hear a little bit about from them later, for which the Society is very, very grateful. Now, this prize celebrates books that make science more accessible, that are a pleasure to read, that are enlightening, creative, and stimulating. Are you nervous yet in the front row? This year's shortlist allows us to dip into fascinating topics, from the untold story of the discovery of DNA to the amazing research happenings at the LHC, the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva. It takes us on some great journeys, whether it be by travelling across the world, investigating humans' impact on our planet, or through a man's personal struggle with OCD. It invites us to take a refreshing look at mathematics in our lives. It gives us a taster of quantum biology. Wonderful range. Now, before I hand over to Brian Cox, who will be our host for the evening, I'd just like to mention and acknowledge and thank the judges of this year's prize. Maybe when I say your name, could you just stand up and wave? Can you? I'm going to start with you, Ian, okay, just to prepare. Right, so number one, Professor Ian Stewart, FRS. He's chair of the judging panel, a mathematician, a Royal Society fellow, known for his Science of Discworld series, which he co-wrote with Terry Pratchett, unfortunately now deceased, and Jack Cohen, who happened to be my tutor at university. Sarah Waters. Sarah. Best-selling author. Books Fingersmith, The Night Watch, The Little Stranger have all been shortlisted for the main Booker Prize. Dr. Adam Rutherford. Adam. Science broadcaster, author, currently hosts Radio 4's Inside Science. Krishnan Guru Murthy. We dropped one. Okay. Lead anchor from Channel 4 News. Perhaps that's the distraction. Claire Armistead. Claire, yeah. Claire is the books editor at The Guardian. And finally, Dr. Joe Sheehan Nig. Joe? Electronic engineer and a Royal Society University Research Fellow from the University of Sheffield. I want to thank you, judges. You've given up a lot of your time to read great books, I know, but still it took time, and a great number to get through to our shortlist and to have the very difficult task of choosing the 2015 winner. Brian, over to you.
Good evening. The plan for this evening is to have each author read a small selection, a piece that they've chosen from their books. And then I'm not going to talk too long because we have time for a quick discussion and questions afterwards before the winner is announced. I'd just like to add my personal thanks to Winton and to the Royal Society for supporting this book prize. It is more and more important all the time, I think, that people, first of all, understand and enjoy what we're doing in science. And secondly, I think can apply, by understanding what we're doing and by understanding the value of it, and you'll see that in the readings and the books that have been chosen today, can, I should be blunt about it, apply pressure to government and to our funders to support science. The public and the politicians have to understand how powerful and important and valuable science is, and it is through popular science books that many people get access to those ideas. So with that small rant, I will begin. I should say also, there's a little note here to remind me to tell you that one of my many jobs is the Royal Society Professor for the Public Engagement in Science. That's a new role, and I'm the first of, I'm sure, many holders of that position. And that again shows, I think, the Royal Society's commitment to not only supporting excellent science, which is done for well over 350 years, but also this project to make science more accessible, more popular, and better supported. So, with that, I'd like to introduce the first of the authors who will be reading tonight. The first book we're going to hear from is The Man Who Couldn't Stop by David Adam. Now, David is a writer and editor at Nature. It's one of the world's leading scientific journals, but he previously worked as science correspondent for The Guardian and reported from many exotic locations, competing with me, including Antarctica, the depths of the Amazon jungle. Please welcome on stage, David.
Sure they got my nose quite right. But, good evening. I'm going to read from the very beginning of the book. I apologise in advance. There is an extremely rude word in here. If you have a child with you, cover their ears when I scratch my head. An Ethiopian schoolgirl called Bera once ate a wall of her house. She didn't want to, but she found that to eat the wall was the only way to stop her thinking about it. She didn't want to think about the wall either. In fact, she was greatly disturbed by the ideas and images of it that dominated her mind. The only way she could make the thoughts of the wall go away and to calm the anxiety they caused was to follow a strange and unbearably strong urge to eat it. So she did, day after day, for year after year. By the time she was 17 years old, she had eaten 8 square metres of the wall, more than half a ton of mud bricks. Bera lived in the capital city, Addis Ababa. Her father died when she was young, and she grew up with her mother. Bera had eaten mud every day for as long as she could remember, since she was a little girl. It became worse as a teenager when she started to take it only from the wall of her home. As she did so, the images and thoughts came more vividly and more often, which only intensified her need to eat to find relief. The mud made Bera constipated, gave her severe stomach aches. Ethiopian traditional healers tried to treat her with prayers and holy water and advised her simply to stop eating the mud. But she couldn't. She couldn't stop her thoughts about the wall, and so she couldn't stop eating it. One day, Bera couldn't cope anymore. Her distended stomach throbbed with pain, her abdomen was tight with cramp, her throat was scratched raw from the straw in the bricks, and her body riddled with parasites from the soil. In tears, she walked to her local hospital. At the time, Ethiopia had 8 psychiatrists for a nation of 70 million people. Bera was fortunate. She managed to see one of them. She told him she needed help. She knew her thoughts were wrong, but she knew she couldn't stop them alone. An average person can have 4,000 thoughts a day, and not all of them are useful or rational. Mental flotsam comes in many forms. There are the irrelevant words, phrases, names and images that flash unprompted into our minds, often when we perform some mundane task. There are earworms, tunes that wedge themselves in our heads, more prosaically called stuck song syndrome. And there are negative thoughts. I cannot do this. I must quit. The sworn enemy of sports psychologists everywhere. Then there are the very strange thoughts. Those occasional, random and unprompted ideas that seem to emerge from nowhere and stun because they are vile, immoral, disgusting, sickening and just plain weird. The seductive question, what if I was to jump in front of that bus? What if I was to punch that woman? These kind of thoughts are more common than most people realise. Ask around. A friend of mine has a need to check the toilet bowl for rats before he sits. Another unplugs the iron and places it in an unusual place when he finishes with it, so he knows for certain the answer when his mind demands later, are you sure, really sure that you turned it off? One tortured soul spent an evening unable to ignore the repetitive thought that he may have scrawled across an application form for his dream job the word. Most people have these kind of strange thoughts. Most shake them off. Some people don't. When we cannot make our strange thoughts go away, they can lead to misery and mental illness. The friends I mentioned above did not convert their strange thoughts in this way, but I did. I turned mine into obsessive-compulsive disorder. Thanks.
Thanks, David. The next book is called Alex Through the Looking Glass by Alex Bellos. Alex is a writer and journalist, currently working as The Guardian's maths blogger and as a curator in residence at the Science Museum. His previous best-selling book, Alex's Adventures in Numberland, was shortlisted for the BBC's Samuel Johnson Prize. So please welcome Alex.
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to read a short section from the very first chapter, which is actually quite different to the rest of the chapters, but hopefully it works. Another response to numbers is affection. After counting, calculating, and quantifying with our numerical tools, it is common to develop feelings for them. But I had not realized the depth of our collective number love, however, until I conducted an online experiment asking members of the public to nominate their favourite numbers and explain their choices. I was taken aback not only by the level of interest, more than 30,000 people took part in the first few weeks, but also by the variety and tenderness of the submissions. The number 2, because the respondent has 2 piercings. Number 6, because the 6th track on the respondent's favourite albums is always the best song. 7.07, since the respondent always used to wake up at 7:07, and once her shopping added up to $7.07 in front of the cute cashier at her local shop. The number 17, because that's how many minutes the respondent takes to cook rice. 24, because the respondent sleeps with her left leg kicked out like a 4 and her boyfriend sleeps like a 2 on his side. The number 73, well known to fans of Big Bang Theory as the Chuck Norris of numbers, because the main character, Sheldon Cooper, points out that it is the 21st prime number and its mirror, 37, is the 12th, which is the mirror of 21. Works better when it's written down. 83, because it sounds good to exaggerate with, as in, I must have done it 83 times. 101, because it's the lowest whole number with an A in it. And 18,912. I'll say that again. 18,912, because its cadence makes it the most beautiful sounding number in the world. That was 18,912. Having a favourite number means that you get a little buzz every time you happen to be sitting in seat 53 on a train, or notice that the time is 9:53, wrote one respondent. I can't think of a reason not to have a favourite number. Thank you.
I don't know if it's... Did you see that one of the judges has written a sparkling romp through the world of numbers there? So I don't feel as biased, although I wasn't a judge, of course, in introducing the next author, who I know extremely well, and I wrote "read this book" on the top of this one. So there's not really nepotism. Anyway, the next book is Smashing Physics by John Butterworth. John, there we are. Read this book. John's a leading physicist at the Large Hadron Collider and head of physics and astronomy at UCL. He's written for several publications, including The Guardian and The New Scientist, and has spoken about particle physics on both radio and TV. So please welcome John.
Thank you very much. I realise the passage I chose actually has one of the judges in it, but since he's not here, it's a completely failed attempt at sucking up. The word boson causes no end of trouble when people report on the search for the Higgs boson. It regularly gets spelled or pronounced boson, and once, while being interviewed on TV and reading the autocue over the presenter's shoulder, I saw it spelled as bosom. Like a true professional, Krishnan Guru Murphy said boson without even blinking. Boson is actually the name for a generic class of particles. The Higgs boson is one of them, but so are many other particles. In the standard model, all the particles that carry forces, the gluons, the W boson, the Z, the photons and the graviton, they're all bosons. Quarks, electrons and neutrinos, on the other hand, are fermions. The difference between them is just spin, but in this context, spin is the quantum of angular momentum. It's a bit like the particles spinning, but it really is just an analogy, since point-like fundamental particles can't really spin. And anyway, fermions have a spin such that in a classical analogy, they would have to go around twice to get back to where they started. Quantum mechanics is just full of semi-misleading analogies like this. Regardless of all that, spin is important. Bosons have, by definition, an integer spin. The Higgs has 0. The gluon, the photon all have 1. And the postulated graviton has 2 units of spin. Quarks and electrons and neutrinos are fermions, and they all have half a unit of spin. And this causes a huge difference in their behavior. The best way we have of understanding fundamental physics is quantum field theory. In quantum field theory, don't worry. In quantum field theory, a state is a configuration describing all the particles in a system, say a hydrogen atom. The maths is such that if you swap the places of 2 identical fermions with identical energies, say 2 of the electrons in an atom, then you introduce a negative sign in the state. If you swap 2 bosons, that doesn't happen. Since swapping 2 identical particles of the same energy makes no difference to the overall state, you have to add up the 2 different cases, swapped and unswapped, when you're calculating the probability of the thing occurring. Adding the plus and the minus in the fermion case gives 0. But in the boson case, they really do add up. This means that any state containing 2 identical fermions of the same energy has got 0 probability of occurring, whereas a state with 2 identical bosons of the same energy has an enhanced probability. This fairly simple bit of maths, and it is when you read it, honestly, it's a fairly simple bit of maths, is responsible for the periodic table and the behaviour of all the elements. Chemical elements consist of a nucleus, an atomic nucleus, surrounded by electrons. Because electrons are fermions, you can't have all the electrons sucked into the lowest energy level around the nucleus. If they were, the probability of that state happening would be zero, by the argument I just made. So as more electrons are added around the nucleus, they have to sit higher and higher up, further and further away from the nucleus. Less and less tightly bound to the nucleus. And the behaviour of any chemical element, how it reacts with other elements and binds to form molecules, where it sits in the periodic table, is driven by how tightly it is bound, is driven by how tightly bound its outermost electrons are. When bosons come together, they do some fascinating stuff too, but it's pretty hard to beat being responsible for the whole of chemistry, and therefore biology and the rest. Some theories extend the standard model of particle physics by relating force-carrying bosons to matter-particle fermions. They do this by introducing a new symmetry between them. This symmetry is so mathematically compelling that it's called supersymmetry, but that's another story.
Thanks, John. The next book, I think, also has a comment from me on the front, I think, or at least the back. It's from my colleague at Manchester, Matthew Cobb. The book is called Life's Greatest Secret. Now, Matthew is a professor of zoology at the University of Manchester, but his interests cover topics as varied as insect behaviour to the history of science, the latter being the foundation for his current book. Please welcome Matthew.
Thank you very much. I'm going to read to you from the foreword to the book because it sets up the whole story and what follows. In April 1953, Jim Watson and Francis Crick published a scientific paper in the journal Nature in which they described the double helix structure of DNA, the stuff that genes are made of. In a second article that appeared 6 weeks later, Watson and Crick put forward a hypothesis with regard to the function of the bases, the four kinds of molecule that are spaced along each strand of the double helix and which bind the two strands together. They wrote, "It therefore seems likely that the precise sequence of the bases is the code which carries the genetical information." This phrase, which was almost certainly the work of Crick, must have seemed both utterly strange and completely familiar to those who read the article. It was strange because nothing so precise had ever been said before. No one had previously referred to genetical information. And yet it was familiar because it fitted so well with the ideas that were in the air at the time. It was adopted without debate. This new way of looking at life seemed so obvious that it was immediately accepted by scientists around the world. Today, these words, or something like them, are said every day in classrooms all over the planet as teachers explain the nature of genes and what they contain. My book explores the surprising origin of these ideas, which can be traced back to physics and mathematics and to wartime work on anti-aircraft guns and signals communication. It describes the way in which these concepts entered biology through the then fashionable field of cybernetics and how they were transformed as biologists sought to understand life's greatest secret, the nature of the genetic code. It is a story of ideas and experimentation, of ingenuity, insight, and dead ends, and of the race to make the greatest discovery of 20th century biology, a discovery that has opened up a brave new world for the 21st century. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. So the next book, Life on the Edge by Jim Al-Khalili and Johnjoe McFadden, doesn't have a quote from me on it because myself and Jim are rivals on Radio 4. We have both co-authors here actually tonight. Both are professors at the University of Surrey. Jim specialising in theoretical physics and Johnjoe in molecular genetics. They're both previous authors of popular science books. In addition, Jim's work as a broadcaster means he's best known for programmes like Radio 4's The Life Scientific, which more people listen to than The Infinite Monkey Cage. And it's true. It's not hard to believe. It's in a better slot. Straight after today. Oh yeah. Inside Science is also available. By Adam Rutherford, yeah. Johnjoe writes for The Guardian. So please welcome Jim and Johnjoe.
Thank you. Well, you have two authors, so you get two readings for the price of one. The winter frost has arrived early this year, and there's a penetrating chill in the evening air. Buried deep within a young robin's mind, a once vague sense of purpose and resolve grows stronger. This will be her first migration away from the spruce forest in central Sweden, where she's lived for the duration of her short life, and where she reared her young chicks just a few months ago. Now, with her parental responsibilities discharged until next spring, she has only herself to think about, and she's ready to escape the coming winter by heading south. It's a couple of hours after sunset. Rather than settle for the night, she hops in the gathering gloom to the tip of the branch. She gives herself a quick shake, like a marathon runner loosening up her muscles before a race. Her orange breast glistens in the moonlight. The mechanism that enables our robin to know how far to fly and in which direction is a sophisticated and unusual one. For like many other birds, and indeed insects and marine creatures, she has the ability to sense the Earth's weak magnetic field and to draw directional information from it by way of an inbuilt chemical compass. Magnetoreception is an enigma. The problem is that the Earth's magnetic field is very weak, only about 1/100th of the force of a typical fridge magnet. And mysteries such as this have long been the haunt of pseudoscientists and mystics. And yet, it has now been established beyond doubt that robins can indeed detect the Earth's magnetic field. And the answer as to how they do this seems to be embedded within the strange science of quantum mechanics.
Thank you, Jim. I've just noticed, has anyone else noticed the winner one's still here? We can have a sneaky look. And in fact, the check. Maybe. Okay. So, good evening, everyone. So now we have to imagine that Quantum Robin has kind of lost its way. Its GPS has failed and it's ended up in Boston. So, molecular biology and quantum mechanics developed in parallel rather than cooperatively. Biologists hardly attended physics lectures, and physicists paid little attention to biology. But in April 2007, a group of MIT-based physicists and mathematicians who worked in a rather esoteric area called quantum information theory were enjoying one of their regular journal clubs when one of the group arrived with a copy of the New York Times carrying an article which suggested that plants were quantum computers. My, that's a long sentence, isn't it? I hadn't read that before. The group exploded into laughter. One of the team, Seth Loyes, recalled first hearing about this quantum hanky-panky. We thought this was really hysterical. It's like, oh my God, that's the most crackpot thing I've heard in my life. That's my only attempt at an American accent. You won't have to suffer it again. The cause of their incredulity was the fact that many of the brightest and best funded research groups in the world had spent decades trying to figure out how to build a quantum computer, a machine that could carry out calculations much faster and far more efficiently than the most powerful computers available in the world today. The New York Times article was claiming that a humble blade of grass was capable of performing the kind of quantum trickery that lay at the very heart of quantum computing. No wonder those MIT researchers were incredulous. They might not be able to build a working quantum computer, but if the article was right, they could eat one in their lunchtime salad. Meanwhile, not far from the room where the MIT Journal Club were laughing their quantum socks off, a photon of light travelling at 186,000 miles per second was hurtling towards a tree with a famous pedigree. Thank you.
So our final book is Adventures of the Anthropocene by Gaia Vince. Gaia is a journalist and broadcaster specialising in science and the environment. She's written for Nature, New Scientist, The Times and Scientific American, amongst others, and has a regular column on BBC Online called Smart Planet. So please welcome Gaia.
Oh yes, the checks. So this is part way through the book. When I arrive at Licapa village below the Chalon Sombrero mountain in the Peruvian Andes, women are doing laundry in a small, grubby-looking pond, while a group of men repair one of the stone houses. These highlanders who speak Quechua, the ancient language of the Incas, have spent the past 20 years trying to rebuild their broken communities, homes and lives after a decade of terrorism. But climate change is against them. Salomon Parko, a young father, is fighting a personal battle against global warming. When he was the same age as his 5-year-old son Wilmer, he tells me, a river ran through the valley, watering the alpaca pastures. Women never used to wash in the pond, he says. But the glacier at Chalon Sombrero, 5,000 metres above sea level, disappeared completely 20 years ago, and with it, the water. All that is left is a black, rocky summit above a rocky channel where a river once ran. It doesn't often rain in Licapa, and what rain does fall is confined to January and February. The rest of the year, the high alpine grasslands rely on glacial meltwater and, in its absence, turn yellow and die. More than 1,000 people have already left the village because they couldn't feed their families, migrating to shanty settlements around Peru's capital, Lima. Parko, with a wife and 3 young children, has considered the same. But my home is here. What would I do in the city? I need to try and make it work here first, he says. Instead, Parko and his friend Geronimo Torres are spending every morning painting the Black Mountain white, hoping to bring back the glacier on which 900 people depend. They began painting the mountain in May, and by my visit in September, they've turned 3 hectares of black rock white. The experiment is based on the principle that a black body absorbs more heat than a white one. By increasing the reflectivity of the black rocks using white paint, the mountain should be cold enough to retain the ice that forms on it, and eventually a glacier will be made. That's the hope anyway. And there are plenty of skeptics. Nevertheless, Parko tells me, he's already seeing results. In the daytime, the painted surface is 5 degrees, whereas the black rock is 20, and at night, the white surface falls to -5, he says. Ice has been forming on the painted rocks overnight, although it has melted by 10:30 in the morning. The plan is to dig a small reservoir of water above the painted section and pump water up to it using a wind turbine, which would then be released during the night in a slow trickle over the paint, where they hope it would freeze, and in time the ice would build up and the process would be self-sustaining because glacial conditions would be there. Parko and Torres have 70 hectares to paint in total, a job that they had thought would take 2 years. We're still painting the mountain because it works and because we have no choice, Parko says. If there's no glacier, there's no water for us, and we will have to move away. I'll finish there.
Well, thank you all. So now it is time to find out did you alter it? No, it isn't. No. I don't think there's anything in this, actually. It is now time. We've got just a few minutes, actually. So I'm going to invite all the authors back on stage. And thank you, Jim. He's a true professional. And we're going to have a little chat for a while. So I think you have to... This is actually not a good idea. Yeah, you need to go around the front, I think. So I thought first I'd go around the panel and ask you why you wrote the book. Well, obviously, brief answers would be a good idea. But you know, what you feel the book brings to public discourse, or the reasons for writing it. I'll start with you.
Well, so I always wanted to write a book, and I never really had a topic. And after I started to, I don't want to spoil the ending for the book. Anyone hasn't read it, but I am still here, so that's a sign that there is a reasonably happy ending. After I started to feel a bit better, I think I thought more about the subject as a journalist rather than someone who was suffering from it, and I wanted to know more about it. And there wasn't really anything out there. There was that I could find. Most of the books about mental illness were either written by clinicians and very detached, or they were written by people as almost as therapy. There were memoirs from people who were right up against it at the time, and although I'm sure it was very helpful for them, it wasn't particularly useful for me. And so I thought, well, maybe that's it. Maybe I'll write a book that, because I write about science in my day job, that explores the science of it while bringing in a bit of personal experience.
Alex?
Well, I spent 20 years not writing about science at all after studying science at university, and then got back into it to write the first one, Alex has mentioned Numberland. And what I thought I was bringing to that was this experience of being a reporter and a foreign correspondent, going back to math, which is my sort of first love. And I got so kind of engrossed in it that there was so much more to do. And the more that I got into it, the more I realised that, you know, we know this, but when you're in there, that math is so kind of, you know, has such a bad reputation for being difficult and people not liking it and people not being very good at it. But there's so much amazing stuff there that I think is accessible to the general reader. And so I guess it kind of became my mission that I wanted to get all that stuff there. And I realised that whereas the first book was my journey into abstraction, I kind of wanted to come back down to the world, and the book is much more about how maths explains the world rather than just the abstractness of maths.
John?
We had an absolutely brilliant few years and found out something really profound and wonderful about the way the universe works. And two things about that frustrated me. One was not enough people. There are a lot of people who wanted to understand more about that and maybe couldn't find it, and I wanted to help with that without glossing over, you know, providing some real hardcore physics, I'm afraid, in there as well, but trying to do it in a way that you could understand it without being a physicist. And the other thing is it's a little frustrating because even people who admire particle physics and are big fans of scientific research tend to think it's done by people who are completely other, and that we're all the Illuminati at CERN or something. And obviously we are, but I wanted to try and humanise it. So it was really I started the book saying I don't know what this book is, but actually I think it's a memoir of just a brilliant time in physics. And since you all paid for it, you ought to share it. Not the book, I mean, you paid for the LHC. You can buy the book if you want.
Matt?
Well, my book's about the moment that changes the whole of modern biology, that makes biology the amazing science that it is today, and which poses us a whole set of challenges because it's the time when people realise that there's this stuff called genetical information in our genes. There's a way of thinking about our genes which takes ideas from physics and from mathematics, and indeed brings physicists and mathematicians into biology, many of them having been repulsed by what happened with the use of the atom bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. People like Maurice Wilkins were actually on the Manhattan Project and came into biology. But the key moment, which I read out in the extract, that's the time when people begin to realise not only that there is information in genes, but even the possibility of exchanging genes between organisms, and the very beginnings of genetic engineering and the modern challenges we have today are also encapsulated in this moment. So I wanted to explain how these ideas came about, which look so obvious to us today, where they came from. And Gaia?
Well, to me, we're living in this extraordinary time where as a global species, we're changing the planet, we're changing its biology, its chemistry, its physics, its geology, everything. And it seemed incredible that so many changes were taking place, and the reason they're taking place is because of the type of species that we are. We're a very human species. We live in societies. We have desires. We have certain ways, certain psychologies that mean that we don't just live like say sheep. We want certain things, and we make it happen, and we were interacting in different ways. And this is such a crucial time, because what we're doing now is going to set a precedent for what happens in the next coming decades. And I wanted to tell the story of the people living at the front line of this, whether it's the front line of our human impacts or the front line of our human changes that we're making, the geoengineering that we are doing to get a more hopeful future for our species.
Jim?
Okay, well, we'll do a double act answer. As Brian mentioned, Johnjoe and I both work at the University of Surrey, and I think our interest in this subject, quantum biology, goes back to 1997, when Johnjoe bravely came from the biology department to give a seminar in the physics department. And since then, he and I have been collaborating together, thinking about this subject as a hobby, but publishing papers in it. And a few years ago, we started to see papers appearing in the top journals in Science and Nature, we're showing very careful experiments proving that actually quantum mechanics does seem to be playing a role within living cells. And we thought we'd better write this book, be the first to write the book in quantum biology before someone else does. I think that's pretty much it.
Okay, well, I'm a biologist, of course, and I've always been fascinated by life, fascinated by biology. When on the beach, instead of running around or swimming or sunbathing as a kid, I'd be hoking around in the rock pools and looking for creatures. There was always something so fascinating about life and inexplicable that I thought about life. And when I then went to university and started learning about how life works, there was a kind of assumption that we know how life works, that it all works by biochemistry and genetics, and yes, it certainly does. There's no question that it does. But it always seemed to me that there was something a little bit lacking in a chemistry which was basically the same kind of chemistry that runs steam engines, that was responsible for life. And then finding out that there's this connection to this really weird stuff that these physicists know about, right down at the level of particles, where everything is strange, and it just seems to make sense to me. And then the evidence came out that some part of the explanation of life is about that connection. And I think it's one of the most fascinating aspects of science around at the moment.
Now, just very briefly, we're basically out of time, but this is an evening about books, celebrating books and the importance and impact of books. I mean, I remember way back when I was young reading Carl Sagan's Cosmos, and it being really contributing to me becoming a physicist. So I wondered if any of you had a book or books that inspired you, or perhaps even a book that you've just read that you think is a great book, other than the ones on this.
You're looking at me.
Well,
we were asked this for The Independent on Sunday, and I really struggle just because I don't read much non-fiction and probably get hounded out. If not for saying the word that I did, but for...
you could say Bleak House if you want or something.
But I think the one that I chose in the end was The Right Stuff by Tom Wolfe, because I was a child and it just sounded... I think it was an advert for the film that I saw first, and I realised it was based on a book, and then it was a book about people doing amazing stuff. And I think that was what... It just showed me, I suppose, that science was carried out by people, and they all had amazing stories.
So I'm glad you went for fiction. It's fiction, though, isn't it? No,
it's non-fiction.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. Oh, well,
we did.
I'm going to go for
You're not one of
fiction.
those. You're not one of those moon deniers.
Haven't
We
read
did
it.
go to the moon.
Do we? No. The shadows are all wrong, I'm telling you. No, sorry, I haven't read that one. I will read it. But the science fiction, it's not. We really didn't have a galactic empire, but I'm actually reading Foundation trilogy again at the moment with my son, and I'm remembering when I read it, which was when I was probably about 10 or 11 or something first, and it's that scope and sense of possibility that stays with me. So I would rather, well, I've read many great science books, and I'm going to read another one now. It's that, I think science fiction really implanted the ideas of the possibilities of, if we understand the universe better, what can we do with it? Very much as about the planet in Gaia's book as well. You know, knowledge is the way forward. You can't retreat back and pretend things didn't happen. You have to learn about where we live and deal with it where we are. And I think that came from science fiction.
Now, sometimes fiction does that really well, like the William Golding book about the Neanderthals.
The Inheritors.
The Inheritors, yeah. I was just thinking about that because I was reminded of it this week. But this idea that you can imagine in fiction something that might have happened, might not have happened, and use that as a device to explore what could happen scientifically. I think it's a really great way of getting your imagination past the restrictions of non-fiction, where you have to stick to the facts and they're not necessarily the best narrative.
So we should allow fiction books into the prize next year. Is that
in the Independent, where we were asked our books, I chose Jim Watson's The Double Helix, but I think today I'd like to recommend what people should read to be a generally educated citizen is Jerry Coyne's Why Evolution is True, which does what it says in the title, which gives the evidence for evolution by natural selection. I think that's one of the most important and powerful ideas that there is, and everybody needs to know not only that it's a fact, but what are the evidence that underpins it. It's incredibly well written, and I recommend it to all young people and older people everywhere.
Alex?
It's a good point about sometimes fiction tells non-fiction better than non-fiction. And in fact, for the Independent on Sunday, I said a non-fiction, which was Apostolos Doxiadis' Logicomics, which is basically a graphic novel about Bertrand Russell's search for kind of mathematical truth. But thinking about it, actually, possibly a better first read is Apostolos' first maths book called Uncle Petros and the Goldbach Conjecture, which is about a fictitious relative of his who solves the Goldbach conjecture, which is unsolved. So you get into the mind of, you get the problem explained in a way which is much more accessible than if you were doing a dry book on the Goldbach conjecture. So that's really good.
Do you want to say what it is in about 10 seconds?
Goldbach conjecture. It's that every prime number, I think I've forgotten what it is. Stage right. Every number is the sum of two prime numbers. Is the Goldbach conjecture, and it's unproven.
Well, since we're all choosing different books to the ones we gave the Independent on Sunday, the one that actually springs to mind with me is Bill Bryson's book, A Brief History of Nearly Everything, because I think we're all scientists, we're all science training, and I sort of shied away from reading Bill Bryson's book. What is he doing writing popular science? He's a travel writer. And yet, you get into a book like that, and he doesn't have a science training, but his passion and sheer delight in discovering science is so infectious, because he can take this sort of zoomed-out view. And what was nice, there wasn't too much physics, not too much quantum mechanics and Higgs bosons. I learned a lot of geology from this book, but he covers the vast range. But he devoted 2 or 3 years of his life.
Is that always nice not to have too much physics?
No. Usually, the more the better.
Depends what you've been doing all day, doesn't it?
But since physics, as at least 3 on the panel would agree, underpins everything anyway.
I think it was chemistry. I think we agreed it was chemistry that underpinned everything.
Well, beg to differ.
Well, Alice Roberts always says, though, that without anthropology, there'd be no physics, which is probably true, isn't it, broadly speaking?
We might not know about the physics, but it'll still be there.
That's true.
Well, for the Independent, I chose Stephen Jay Gould's What is Life, but just from Brian's question, I was kind of thinking, what was the first science book I read? And I said, and I don't even know the author, I don't know the title of this book. And the strange thing about it is it was completely wrong, but it got me interested in science. It was just, I was only very young when I read it. It was some bizarre book that was making a comparison. It was looking at the structure of the solar system and then the structure of atoms and electrons surrounding the nucleus, and saying that it was the same kind of thing, and maybe on the electrons there were little planets and people were living.
How old are you?
That was last year. But it was obviously completely wrong. But I think it's kind of interesting that a lot of the great science books turn out to be wrong. And I think it's all right to be wrong in science. Sometimes we can get a bit too precious about being wrong. Most of everything that is written is wrong in science later. So sometimes wrong stuff can be very stimulating and great stuff to read.
Okay. Well, thank you all. We've run out of time, sadly, but thank you very much. Yes. So now it is time to reveal the winner. So to make the announcement, I'd like to welcome on stage Dr. Stephen McCauley, who's Research Principal at Winton, the prize's sponsor, and also Sir Paul Nurse, President of the Royal Society.
Thank you. On behalf of Winton, I'd like to congratulate the authors for their wonderful books. I promised Brian I would say 10 sentences or less, so I will be quick and you can relax. In addition, I'd like to thank everyone who is involved in putting together this wonderful evening. For those of you who do not know, Winton is an investment management firm. We are unusual in that we hire scientists for research, and we go to the Atlas experiment at CERN on our field trips, for instance. As a principle, I've observed over the years that in order for our research to have a real commercial impact on the behalf of our clients, effective communication is critical. Thus, science and science communication are really core to our values, and it is a pleasure to be involved in this prize. And without further ado, I'd like to pass over to Sir Paul.
Well, thank you, Stephen. And on behalf of us all and the Royal Society, I really want to thank Winton for their generous support of the prize in the last 5 years. I can tell you, without them, we would not have had a prize. So thank you very much. And I'd like to thank Brian. Do you know, Brian, I think you might have a career on television if you work hard at it. Really good. Thank you for that. Now, we're approaching the most exciting event, of course, of the evening, the announcement of the winner. But I just wanted to say a few words myself first, just to sort of up the tension a little, about popular science writing. Because quite simply, popular science writing is a major way of communicating to wide audiences the excitement of science, what science is, why it's such a reliable way of generating knowledge and understanding of the natural world and also, of course, of ourselves. Good science writing puts science at a central place in our culture, and that's exactly where it needs to be. If we are to promote science, if we are to reap the benefits of science, which it can bring to society, science needs that central place in society. And the public at large and political leaders need to know that. Really, really critical. That's why we need good science writing, and that is what we are celebrating tonight. So now, it's the Oscar moment. Do you know the most extraordinary thing? The cheque is still here. So there's honesty. Now, here is the winner. This is what we've all been waiting for. Within this envelope, I will be able to find the winner. And who is it going to be? Gaia Vince, Adventures in the Anthropocene.
You may have. Oh, wow.
Say a few words.
Right, okay. I'll try not to swear. Wow. God, I really, I have my money on something else, so I'm really surprised. Thank you very much to the judges for their excellent judging. So I would like to thank, first of all the people that I met whose incredible stories are true. I mean, they really are these amazing people. I'd like to thank the 3 people that bought my book. I'd like to thank Becky Hardy at Chatto and Windus. She's here somewhere. There. For taking a leap of faith and believing in it enough to see it through to fruition. I'd like to thank my friends and family, particularly my parents, for doing the childcare that made this possible. I'd like to thank my partner Nick, who couldn't be here today because, he's trying to introduce a bottle to a breastfed baby for the first time. Good luck with that. Whose amazing pictures are on and in the book, and if you like them, he has many more on his website, so do buy them. And I don't really know what else to say. The book is about this extraordinary time that we're in. It's about the really big, to me, the most important thing is the fact that science is very much in society. It's part of society. It shapes society. And society needs to take ownership of that and look at what we are doing to the planet, some of which is brilliant and some of which is worrying for our own species and for the many species that actually prop up human species. So we're incredible, but we have a bit of hubris about that, and we need to look at the direction we're going at. Anyway, I don't want to get all preachy and weird on it. So thanks very much. Jesus, I can't believe it. I really can't believe it.
And enough of all this kissing, if you like. Well, this was a wonderful event. We have a wonderful winner, but we also had a wonderful, wonderful shortlist too. Thank you very much, the shortlist. So this brings the formal proceedings to the end, but if you go to the back of the room, you'll find some drinks and some canapes. Thank you very much, all of you, for coming. Thank you.